Alrighty, so re-recording this video because my audio had was muted yesterday and I had no idea until I uploaded it and somebody said that I was muted. So thank you for telling me about that. But so basically, yesterday I watched the Justice League in its 4 hour entirety, and honestly, I gotta say I was pretty impressed. Um, well, pretty impressed based off of what was released back in 2017 when Justice League originally came out. Zack Snyder's Justice League really improved upon the story, whereas the previous Justice League had like nothing to do with the story. It was kind of just like people are doing things to do stuff, and what I really liked about Zack Snyder's Justice League was that everything was super duper fleshed out, and it was like there was a lot of things that were overly clarified because of how much time was allowed for everything to like take root and be explained, which was one of my favorite things about Zack Snyder's Justice League is just how well developed a lot of the key points were, and it made a lot more sense of okay, this is why this is happening and this is how we get here, rather than here's a scene, here's a scene, here's a scene, here's a scene. There's not as much of that in Zack Snyder's Justice League. Of course there's a couple like time jumps and you're like, how much time has passed? Like, what's going on here? Like, in the intro, we go from the death of Superman to Batman being in Aquaman's village, and you're like, what? How'd we get here? Like, how much time has passed? And then again, with like the introduction of the Amazons, you kind of have the introduction of the Amazons, and then they're like, go get the queen, and then like this time jump happens, and then the queen shows up, and you're like, must have taken a long ass time to get the queen, or Batman's really fast at climbing over mountains, which it was just something that was super confusing to me. But and I would go with another negative, Flash, super fucking annoying in this version of Justice League, where I feel like in the original Justice League, he was probably the best part and what made the movie bearable even. So, because of that, and he had so much screen time, there's a lot of like really flat jokes because DC and Zack Snyder's Justice League have been trying to mirror Marvel movies, and they can't. They simply cannot do that. And by introducing the Flash as this like goofball, it's like there's a correct way to do it and there's an incorrect way to do it, and I feel like they made it they did the wrong way, 100%. And like there was yeah, there were so many jokes that were like flat, like something that even in the original, the line of I have to snack a lot, I'm like a snack hole, it's just like that's not even like a pun or anything. It's just a really bad, just really horrible line. Another thing that was a negative was like the character of Aquaman is just kind of like is just an asshole, and he doesn't do much, and that was just really annoying because he saves people in the beginning. Batman comes and he says, hey, I know that you save people in the water and you're from the water. Like, can you help us? That would be pretty cool. And Aquaman, pretty much for no reason, kind of just joins. Besides the fact that he likes to save people, and I don't know why. Bringing back Superman, that's a cool scene. I think that's a cool scene. The scenes where Flash was running and not talking were pretty cool, except for I feel that every time he would run, it would end by him crashing into something, and it really took away from like the character of the Flash. And for anything that he did had to be funny for some reason, and he couldn't just run because, oh, he has to trip and crash into this because that's slapstick humor, when it's just annoying that we have all these other characters jumping around the scene, fighting everybody, and Flash, he's there to run and make sure that things basically go smooth, and he pushes like Wonder Woman's sword towards her, and he's the reason Superman gets brought back, and he rewinds time at the end of the movie, and there's so much that he does, but then after he pushes Wonder Woman's sword, he stumbles and crashes into something. Why? After he taps the mother box to bring Superman back, he crashes into something. Why? Why did it's just so unnecessary that happens. However, there have been a lot of criticisms towards the movie, and there are a lot that I like to speak on. One being, why is Batman there? Batman's there to bring the team together. That's his purpose. That's all he needed to do. Without Batman, there is no Justice League. He funds the Justice League. He sets up the headquarters at the end. He gets everything rolling for the Justice League. And yeah, he's just a guy, but he's kicking ass, just like everybody else is. More so than the Flash is, in my opinion. Flash is, like I said, he's there to run. Aquaman is just there to save people, which was kind of annoying, but I really liked what they did with Cyborg, and he was really fleshed out, and it almost felt like it was largely Cyborg is just trying to accept who he's become, and I think that they did a really good job with that arc. One thing that I didn't necessarily like, though, because I'm going to keep flipping between like negative and positive, so I'm not just ragging on the movie or praising it, because that could be annoying both ways. Another thing that I didn't like, though, was this like romance between Wonder Woman and Batman, because it's just kind of strange, and it's not really, there's no real reason for it. They're just two characters that had a lot of screen time together, so there's like sexual tension there, and that was kind of strange. Another thing people didn't get was the introduction of Martian Manhunter, which to that I would just like to reference Marvel like post-credit scenes, because they introduce stuff that's not necessarily explained till several movies later, and having Martian Manhunter in the middle of the movie, while kind of jarring, it was essential, because without that, Lois wouldn't have gone to work, and she wouldn't have been in the right spot at the right time. Whereas if he wouldn't have like I said, if he wouldn't have visited her, she wouldn't have been able to get back out there and basically save Superman. Even though she was going to the memorial every day, it was still like that interaction with Martian Manhunter as Martha was extremely important, because she was like, oh, this is my last time, and Martian Manhunter went and told her, hey, go one more time, say goodbye again, and that kind of helped push that along. I'm not gonna justify it. Yeah, it was a very weird thing to just like throw in there and then reference in the epilogue again, but still, there was a reason, and there's also like the scene in Batman versus Superman where the nightmare version of Flash runs back in time and says she's the key, referencing Lois Lane and her overall like arc. There's more to her than meets the eye, I guess, and that plays into the Martian Manhunter thing as well. So there are little tidbits being left along of this bigger story, which really helps build this cinematic universe that they're going for. And while it's not the best, if you look at Batman versus Superman and Justice League as their own little continuation of one another, there's a solid foundation. It's just where do they go from this? Because they can't go to like a solo movie now because you have Darkseid and the heroes know about Darkseid. So unless he's got more lackeys like Steppenwolf, there will be nothing else on the table bigger than Darkseid. Because what the Marvel movies did so well is like they had here's a villain that has no correlation with the Avengers movies. And then they build up to the Avengers movies, beat the villain, and then they have literally villains until they come back together for a big villain, come back together for a big villain. But every time they are defeated, the big villain is. And now that Darkseid on the table, you can't just have, oh hey, we met up to beat this big villain, but the big villain's still out there. You have to have Justice League 2 because you can't just have another spin-off movie. Like, I don't care about going back in time and watching another Wonder Woman movie because guess what? She's gonna live. I don't care. I do not care. Aquaman's gonna live. Superman's gonna live because they just brought him back. Batman's gonna live. Flash is gonna live. Cyborg's gonna live. There's no more tension with that. Maybe a Batman movie off to the side because Deathstroke will be a little caveat for him, but he'll live. It's just a matter of how he'll live because they're not gonna kill him as they have this greater story still going on. So there's that point. Another thing is the DC cinematic universe just has to stay in their lane, and I think that this was a great example of why, because with the DC cinematic universe, it is very dark, it is very gritty. Making it rated R, not necessarily needed, but I feel that it would allow them to touch a lot more on backstories of characters. Like, they aren't light backstories. Superman is literally a Kryptonian, and the Kryptonians were wiped out. A mass genocide. That's not light. That's not a PG-13 topic. Cyborg was almost in a life-altering crash and had to be brought back by the Mother Box in a horrific scene in Zack Snyder's Justice League. That's not PG-13. Like, the Flash is like, yeah, whatever. His origin story is pretty tame. Batman's parents were fucking killed. That's not PG-13. Like, look at Iron Man. That's PG. Oh, he's rich. His parents didn't die, and that's what pushed him to become a superhero or any shit like that, to fight crime. No. Thor, he's just the son of Asgard, which is kind of like Aquaman or Wonder Woman. So that's all right. Captain America, just a super soldier, not much to that story. Very much same thing with the Hulk. It's just Marvel is very advertised towards children, and a different audience than DC movies is, and DC kind of just needs to recognize that, because Marvel movie fans are going to be Marvel movie fans, and there's no way you're just going to get somebody to switch from being a Marvel movie fan to being a DC movie fan. You don't, if I go to the movies, I don't want to see one movie trying to imitate another movie. I want to watch a movie that's original and in their lane. If I go to, what would be a good example? I don't even know what a good example would be. If I go to see a horror movie, I want to be scared. I don't want to be laughing, something like that. It's just, of course, there are certain instances where you're supposed to laugh, but like let's say I go to see the Poltergeist. I'm not going to see the Poltergeist to laugh. I'm going to be scared. It's kind of the same thing with like a DC movie. I'm going for this dark, gritty superhero movie where sacrifices have to be made, people have to be killed, whereas with a Marvel movie, it's going to be a fun time almost 90% of the time, and DC just does not give that vibe. If I don't want to hear like Superman shouting quips as he's punching somebody through buildings that was literally just trying to destroy the earth. You know what I mean? It's just like, as much as I hate to say it, apples to oranges. Comparable, but completely different at the same time. It's kind of annoying that they keep trying and pushing this envelope of, oh, we can be like Marvel. If they do their own thing and they really embrace what they are, they could be a competitor to Marvel. But DC isn't even a blip on Marvel's radar because of how successful Marvel has been. DC, they just announced Suicide Squad, and Suicide Squad has the villain of Starro, who is a galactic threat. If you look at, like, let's take the first Iron Man, for example, and the villain of Warmonger, the Ironmonger, Warmonger, same difference, I think. I don't really remember his name, but he wasn't a galactic threat, you know what I mean? Almost every single villain for the Justice League is going to be a galactic threat. Aquaman is going to be a threat to Earth. If you have a villain that fights Aquaman, it's a threat to Earth. If you have a villain that fights Superman alone, it's going to be a huge threat to Earth, just the whole solar system, probably some shit like that. Wonder Woman, with what we've seen with Wonder Woman, it's just not really the whole Earth, more like a individual country. Batman is more like the city of Gotham, pretty much. The Flash, like the whole timeline is in jeopardy. So you can kind of see that there are such bigger threats in the DC cinematic universe than your average Marvel movie, and yet they're trying to scale these threats down to be like a Marvel movie. Like Suicide Squad 1 compared to the Suicide Squad, not to be confused at all. That's not going to be confusing later on to reference or talk about either of those. But the first Suicide Squad movie had the threat of the Enchantress, and yeah, the whole world was at odds, basically. Like, shit was just about to hit the fan, like the core of the earth was being drilled into or something like that. I don't really remember, but like, that's a huge threat, and now they're gonna go fight Starro, and Starro's a galactic threat that was like stuck in the Pentagon or some shit like that. Can't really tell because that movie's not out yet, but that's huge. That's, as Mysterio would say, that's an Avengers level threat, and that that's just a huge character that they're kind of just like, well, it is what it is. We're just gonna keep throwing these big ass villains into these mixes and seeing what happens. Like, DC is trying to pull an ace out of their sleeve when they don't even have a sleeve on. Whereas Marvel could literally tomorrow announce a movie with some estranged character. They could announce the Beta Ray Bill movie, and everybody would be like, "Wow, that's crazy! That's gonna be such a good movie," because that's the precedent. There's very little buzz about the Suicide Squad movie. If they announce Aquaman 2, I would not care. Another Man of Steel movie might be interesting depending on what they do with it, but at this point they'd probably introduce like Brainiac and Supergirl, and you'd be like, "Oh, well, those are two big characters that are just in the waste bin now." So there's just so much that could happen, but they keep going for these bigger and bigger names because they're more recognizable. Whereas if they really tone down what they're going after Justice League 2, because they either have to beat back Darkseid to the point where he is not a threat, or they have to do a ton of other very little intricacies. Like, any movie that comes in the DC cinematic universe now, either they have to be directly fighting Darkseid or one of his lackeys, or referencing this looming threat. Because if they're not, anything is going to seem so minuscule to it. I feel like I've ranted about that point. I think you get the point if you're still watching this. It's just, they've really backed themselves into a corner, and I'm curious to see how they get themselves out of it. Because of the 6 characters on screen right now, behind me, I guess, you can't have another movie with any of them until you drive this point home. So you have to rely on the Suicide Squad, which, these are just spin-off movies. Like, there's no canon with them right now at all. Like, Batman vs Superman ties into the Justice League, but Wonder Woman has nothing to do with... Wonder Woman is very loosely connected to a point in Batman vs Superman. I haven't seen Wonder Woman 2, but I could assume it's either very little connection or very minuscule connection. Superman, the Man of Steel, very little connection to either movie. Aquaman, very little connection to either movie. Suicide Squad, again, it's just, there's not a canon, and these movies, they're not building a universe, they're just telling stories at this point, which is fine. However, you can't introduce stuff in one movie that doesn't have a payoff in another, because Marvel has set up everything ties into something. Everything explains something. They could pull on anything from one of their movies, and people would be like, "Oh yeah, that's when this happened." But right now, I think that Justice League is a great starting point. They can have Martian Manhunter. They could bring in and reboot Green Lantern. Hopefully it'd be better than Ryan Reynolds' Green Lantern. But there's so much that they have to do correctly that there's a very large margin of error. And we'll see with the Suicide Squad, but it'd be nice to maybe have references to the Justice League or something of that nature, so that we are building on a story rather than here's a story, here's a story, here's a story. And Batman vs Superman, while a pretty garbage movie really paved the way for Justice League and Zack Snyder's Justice League. Can we push it another block? Only time will tell. Thank you for listening to me ramble, and have a great one.